Richie?
Yes.
Just trying
Yes,
to
I've
bring
already
this in.
yeah, it's recording now. So go ahead.
Thanks, Richie. That smile, all of our YouTube thumbnails for these community calls is always somebody with like a big smile on their face. I don't know if you pick those, Richie, or if it just Google does that for us. But
Google gives you or YouTube gives you three things to choose from, and I have too many left thumbs, so I can't make my own preview images. So I just pick usually the ones which have faces, and ideally faces which smile, and then I try to not always pick the same faces. So that's basically my heuristic of choosing one of those three images. But
I get the
sometimes you
notifications
only
on my
get
phone, and it always makes me laugh. Somebody with a big smile on their face.
So if you don't want to be in a thumbnail, then don't smile today.
Yeah, don't smile.
That's
Definitely.
basically the message. Yeah.
Does anybody feel free to add to this agenda in the community call? Anything you want to talk about? Anything and everything? I don't really have a ton of stuff. In a lot of ways, I think after 2.0, we kind of chilled out a little bit, and there wasn't a whole lot that's happened in the last month. A lot of PTO as well too. So, but 2.1 snuck in there. Overdue. I wanted that to be out closer to 2.0, but mostly that's my fault. I wanted to get the Helm chart stuff sorted out. They aren't necessarily tied together, but 2.1 was the first release with the Helm charts in their new location. So I called out a thanks to Torsten and Reinhard for their incredible work to make that possible. So we were approached some time ago. I know Scott Rigsby was another name in there that was very, very helpful in both convincing me that it makes sense to centralize our Grafana Helm charts in one repository and basically doing all of the hard work to make that happen. So look to those two new URLs for anything Helm related. And including Reinhard has contributed a microservices version of the Loki Helm chart. I know that's often been asked for a lot, in fact. So that's a very, very nice contribution. So check that out too. 2.1 itself was mainly a lot of performance, I would say bug fixes. So in the 2.0 release, we added probably a couple of regressions. There's a lot of rewrite to the query code, both performance and in some bugs. And I think that covers pretty much anything big that we saw. Some kind of upgrade paths that led to panics. That kind of stuff was fixed. So that's good news. The 2.2 release will be a little bit cooler in some ways because it should have the write-ahead log that Owen's been working on. We're basically testing that now and eating up on it a little bit. And I think end of January, I didn't have the link handy, but we've been trying to use the GitHub milestones more for tracking the work and upcoming work. So we'll circle back around and kind of get that cleaned up to be able to give some input into what's coming in 2.2. But I would say expect that closer to the end of January. Another thing that's been merged and we have to kind of deploy, there's a big rewrite of Promtail, thanks to Cyril and Karsten for doing that to sort of change how we move stuff around to enable, I don't have the PR there, but multi-line support in Promtail, probably one of the I can't not be distracted.
I mean,
I know you weren't. That's not what you're asking in Protect. So on the Promtail multi-line, that it's similar to probably what people are familiar with. Hopefully, where you would match a pattern to sort of look to determine whether it's a continuation of a current line or a new line. Similarly, if you're on a cloud user, we did increase the line size limit. I think 64 KB. In fact, I know it's 64 KB. I should actually go look and see what the defaults are in our repo too, and sure we increase those. So with the ability to append logs to each other, we kind of expect people will send longer logs. There's some trade-offs that you make with allowing longer log lines in Loki, but 64 KB still seems pretty sane. The general concerns would be memory usage at query time for queries that match lots of streams. So if your label selectors don't narrow down the streams and you have many of them, hundreds or thousands, you can still, or you increase the likelihood that you could run into memory problems if you write really big queries. So that's the trade-off with the line size. And the multi-line, we've been working around that with show context. I know the for large stack traces, like things with big frameworks like Java apps and things, that's not the best experience. So we'll get that out in 2.2 and look forward to some feedback on how that works. In this case, the write ahead log that that Owen's added. I don't know if is Owen here. No, he's 7 a.m. is a tricky one. So effectively, we're fairly, I would say, typically like what you would expect on ingestion of samples into the ingesters. We write those to disk and follow similar patterns that like Prometheus uses, where we write to disk and periodically checkpoint in order to keep the replay times a little bit quicker. And then basically the general idea is currently, if you crash an ingester, if you out of memory kill it, especially, any of the memory or the logs that it had in memory would be lost, and we typically rely on the replication factor in the cluster to defend against that. However, we all know cascading failures happen. Any number of things can happen. So the write-ahead log adds some resiliency there, so that if you do crash a process, it should restart and replay the wall and recover the information that was in memory. And this will let us play around a little bit with how much information we keep in memory, but there's sort of pros and cons to that too, in terms of the chunks. If the time that they span is too long, it makes querying a little bit trickier. So, but it does open the door for basically allowing us to set longer limits for idle times and times to fill chunks.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you. I was just mainly asking because, this is the work that, the TSDB already have. So it's amazing that you actually got inspired. So, but yeah, you had to re-implement that for your format. But it's funny because like even Conprof is using exactly TSDB because there is already wall in this sense. So no, it's good that it's kind of in the same area of patterns and design. So no, that sounds good.
Yep.
I hope you didn't have to re-implement too much stuff. But,
yeah, I actually would have to. Owen did most of the work on that, so I know like for the most part, I know he uses the Cortex wall work, which is based on the Prometheus wall work. So it does definitely follow a lot of the same patterns, and I suspect that our implementation was fairly different because we're pulling out of the head block model that was basically the Cortex chunks model. And I think the wall was only ever implemented in Cortex for TSC. No, I take that back. It would have been in both. I can't remember now. But anyway.
It was implemented in chunks, but when we moved to blocks, we just basically used Prometheus. We got that for free.
Yep. Nice.
Yeah, what I'm saying is that there is this kind of it's a good direction, but since for example Conprof is using that and abusing obviously, there is a need for a wall or like essentially a TSDB for bigger chunks. So this is the direction where Prometheus, Thanos, Cortex, Conprof, those TSDBs could grow potentially. But yeah, good stuff. Thank you.
All right. I opened an issue in GitHub. This is an experiment of some sort. It's historically been kind of tricky to get, I would say, feedback from the community. I mean, normally we look at GitHub issues for activity, for thumbs up. those are, I would say, probably the two biggest metrics. Not necessarily whether they're opened or closed. I don't, there's another discussion that I want to have about, I think what my philosophy is changing to about how we handle open and closed issues, but primarily like something being closed is not intended to say we won't work on it. It's more intended to say we're not working on it right now. Just to maybe add some sanity around the amount of open issues. However, like I said, different discussion, but in terms of community feedback, we look at issues, we look at, recent activity, and, the thumbs up, you can sort of sort by that in GitHub on the original issues, number of comments, et cetera, to try to figure out, what the community is very interested in. But it would be nice to sort of I just kind of made a general forum. Now, GitHub issue isn't great for this because, it's single threaded and it sort of seems, nice to have some conversation. So my only real guidance here is if there is a topic that you have, input on, to just make a separate issue and have that comment in that separate thread. Or if there's an existing issue, talk about it there. Feel free to link it back in that initial. In the past, when we've tried to do things like design doc reviews or more elaborate things with conversation, it gets really hard to follow when you get multiple sort of threads in line there. So, but additionally, if anybody has other ideas, we've considered sort of surveys and things. But I guess the bigger part of this is the kind of the outreach. So, feel free to share that link, and we'll gather some feedback. So far, so good. Everybody that has commented so far, it's kind of interesting to see. But I guess I don't really want to have to caveat it, but I can't guarantee, what we work on. But I definitely want the feedback so that we can, kind of evaluate. I picked a common topic to start the list off because it's been one of the older issues. It's been there for a long time, which is, should we have like Debian and RPM and other packages for Promtail and parts? I've been reluctant to do that because I've actually had a job in the past maintaining Debian packages, and I know that it's not an insignificant amount of work. And there's, probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 at least very commonly used package managers now. There's probably a dozen less commonly used. So I'm not sure. Like, it's just been hard for me to prioritize that because there's a lot of other fun stuff we want to work on and a lot of other neat features we want to work on. So this is always kind of the balance we change. But it all starts with getting some useful feedback from people that let us know what they want. So, and that's it. That's all I had for the.
One thing to keep in mind when packaging stuff for distributions is that you're basically enabling a new group of operators to start using your stuff. Because there's plenty of companies which are basically only using packaged stuff from packaged through distributions, for better or for worse, which are usually in the more traditional space, but also especially for logging. A lot of those are in the traditional space. And I see Bartek nodding. That might be because he has the same experience from Red Hat, seems like. So don't underestimate the distribution vector through classic packaging. As a Debian developer myself, I hate Debian packaging, and it's ancient and it's broken. And how Go does static stuff versus how Debian is built around dynamic stuff makes a lot of things super hard, but it's most likely still worthwhile.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I don't disagree. I don't want to do it, and nobody from anywhere else has stepped up to do it. We'll I'm sure do it, or even perhaps more likely within the Grafana Cloud agent. Maybe we can make them do it. Yeah, I guess interestingly, like I haven't heard. Well, I don't know. We definitely hear people feedback that they want it, right? I don't know how to measure that against like how sort of requested or how much of a burden it is. I know I've written systemd unit files to run Loki on Raspberry Pis, and I can't say that, I love it, but it's like a couple minutes of Googling and, I'm off to the races. But yeah, that I'm not sure. Like I suspect we will get there. I've just been dragging my heels on it, I think is what I'm saying. So if, that ends up being the most popular issue on that list, or we continue to get a lot of input for it, I'm sure we'll end up there. All right. Somebody's added some topic suggestions. You want to feel free to that what you, Ward? I wasn't sure who WPK is.
Yeah, that's
Nice.
that's my
Yeah, take it away.
Yeah,
tell us what you're talking about.
but before we dive in, I just want to make sure that maybe other folks have other topics as well. So this is on my mind, but I'm not saying it is more important than some other folks might have on mind for the call. That could be beneficial for the community. So I just wanted to check that first.
You're good for it. Go for it, Ward. And certainly if anybody's here that thinks of something, just feel free to add it.
Yeah.
While Ward is talking.
All right. Yeah, this is actually something I was discussing initially with Cyril together. I was building out a demo maybe for our next video, and it was using, in this case, cryptocurrency ticker events. And of course, you want to be able to zoom into those events and get the maximum amount of resolution that you can get. We have the thing that we do aggregations when we want to chart something on a graph, and that aggregation requires an interval to be specified. And the issue that I ran into is that there were two things. The one is that the way Grafana handles the result of Loki, that it doesn't show kind of a complete graph, but it shows basically disconnected points series if you zoom in enough, and it can be solved by choosing a higher interval. Because the reason is that I might be confusing folks, but yeah, you can do max overtime with LogQL, and what it does is that you, for every interval, let's say every 5 seconds, you get a max value, and that max value can be charted. The problem I ran into is that I cannot guarantee there's a value every 5 seconds, and that would result in gaps. And there might be an issue with Grafana on this. I'm still checking it out, because those graphs were not connected, and that shows basically kind of not so useful graph. So that's one thing. The other thing is that I want to have maximal resolution zoom in capabilities, and essentially not the max value, but just give me the value that is actually in the log file, in the event. And Cyril was already working on, in the past, on a possibility to have kind of last value over time or something like that. And yeah, I was just wondering if this is something that is interesting for more folks here on the call. And yeah, maybe Cyril can talk a little bit more about the complexities and some of the trade-offs that you see around implementing such a use case.
So you're not alone here. I definitely I want to have unwrap in the pipeline stage output a series with the same resolution.
Yeah.
But there's problems though. Specifically, we don't know what you do to deal with cardinality, right? So if you don't, like unwrap is not a function, it's a pipeline stage. So it doesn't have any way to do aggregation by label values. So if you have a JSON or log format stage that's creating tens or hundreds of labels, and you unwrap one of those, you'll end up with however many series there were for tens or hundreds of labels with tens or hundreds of values or whatever. So somehow we have to add the ability to aggregate that a little bit. And that doesn't always make sense either, right? Because a sum might work, or we are entertaining something like values where you just show discrete values, but then that would have to error if the aggregation of certain labels is, if their values are different, then you can't just combine them into one stream. So for the unwrap, I don't know how to sort of figuring out how to handle those cases. I do think it's possible. There's one other sort of thing here that I think will be okay, but we have a Prometheus compatible endpoint for metrics, which this would be. Prometheus technically doesn't support nanosecond resolution, but Loki does. So I believe because the format is seconds dot decimal, that we could just add the precision at the end and it would be okay. But if we can't do that, then you basically need a function that downsamples your data to at most millisecond resolution. So we have to kind of keep that in mind too. But I think that will just work because we'll just add more precision to the end of the decimal so that we can output the data at the resolution that exists in Loki. That's kind of the thoughts with unwrap. The first part, I suspect this is a Grafana bug. Or maybe it's not a bug. Maybe it's just that I think we should have an option for it to connect. But when we looked at that the other day, if you do a max over time with a range of 1 second, and then you have a interval or a step that has no values in it, Loki just sends nothing back for that step.
No,
and
exactly.
I think that's the correct behavior. And I think what we want is Grafana to have us the option like they do for null values to just connect the lines. And they have that option for null values to connect the lines. So this, I think maybe we just need to open an issue and understand so that graph can be continuous.
Yeah, another option is to use the last value over time to implement this. Well, it's already implemented, but to use that, and then you can use a range that is, let's say, 1 minute. So you're sure that every minute you have at least one sample, and then after you can have a step that is, as big or as small as you want, and you kind of have the resolution that you want. You cannot have the full resolution, but at least you can get a very small one.
Yeah, I'm fighting the fight for unwrap still to be able to have like full resolution, but next I need to build a doc so that we can actually discuss those complexities and see what we're gonna do. Yep. How we want to solve that. There was where did I see? Oh, it was in the thread of community requests. Somebody wanted the ability to use LogQL to sort of strip labels out in line. That's potentially another solution for this problem too. Like if the query language allows you to just remove labels, then using unwrap is either sort of allow list or deny list those labels. Something to that effect. You could use unwrap then in perhaps the same way to get discrete values at whatever their original cadence that they came in at.
Yeah, and that would also, you mean solving the issue that you need to sum otherwise?
Yeah, right. How do we reduce the number of series that get returned if there's too many? That's the general problem there.
Should we still merge or finish this PR with last and first? Because I think it has a nice use case. Where
I think so. I don't know if there's any risk of adding it. I guess adding complexity to the language, I suppose, if it's not used. But I feel like that's, I don't know. I think we should merge.
Well, for this image here, it will be useful.
Yeah,
because it will solve this problem. Because if you do a max over 1 minute and you have like a 10 item in that period, then you might not get the last value. You might get the first one or one in the middle. So yeah, max is kind of helping, but not really solving the problem. I think last and first over time is kind of solving the problem. And it's also nice because it could technically later help for improving performance, because we could skip through, as soon as we found one item, we could skip through the rest of the item and move to the next step.
Yeah. Well, does that mean we should just do first over time? Right? Because that would give you that, but last over time, maybe not.
Yeah.
Would there be I don't know. We could start, and then if someone
Well,
says,
it's
"Hey, I
not-
really
I think,
need it
yeah,
last over time," but
I still think that yeah, it will be useful for high throughput
yeah.
stream. Yeah.
Okay. I'm prepared to move on from that ward if or anyone else has got any more comments.
No, great feedback. And
Yeah, why don't you intro your next point?
yeah, well, I also see that Dee has put a issue there or a question there, a topic there. So
No, it's not
feel
the.
free to switch around.
I think is that Danny? Is that your? I think I saw that.
Oh,
Yeah.
Danny, sorry. It was either Dee or Danny. Sorry.
Overlapping.
Next step is everybody chooses a GUID or use that one.
I'll store that as a label. All right.
Cool.
Yeah, Danny, you want to talk about this PR? I'm excited about it.
Cool. Yeah, so first time caller, first time contributor. So I ran across this ran across the need for something like this recently. So I thought I'd just hack it together. Hopefully it will be useful. So I think all the details are in the PR if anybody wants to look at it more closely, but effectively this is introducing group by into LogQL. For those of you familiar with SQL. So you just, I've chosen the term dedupe, which could be helpful or hurtful, depending on its relationship with the Grafana Explorer view dedupe, because we have something related but not exactly the same in there. So all I really wanted to do was reduce a list of logs down by a particular label or a set of labels, or the inverse of that. And so I can maybe give a demo if that would be illustrative. I'm not sure if
That's
not sure if we want to share an internal dashboard because I'm only using it there. What do you think?
I guess as long as there's not any sensitive information in it, it should be fine. Like host names and cluster names, I'm not worried about. It's more like customer names than I am.
Yeah, okay, cool. Let me quickly make sure that there's nothing sensitive in here. Okay, let me reduce this down.
We can test Richie's video editing skills.
Yeah, if you can just blur out.
If we have a 5-second live delay button on here, we can.
I can blur and I can cut whole chunks of video out, and that's the extent of my powers. We also have board if we need more magic, but usually I just do it within YouTube's UI.
Okay, cool. That should be fine. I don't think there'll be anything too sensitive in here. There's no customer names or anything. So
perfect.
Cool. So with all of that preamble, so this is our alerting dashboard. So to show some active alerts. And what I've got over here is an annotation that shows when a particular deployment occurred. So now we run a CI/CD process, and we've got multiple clusters running, and so typically the same change will be applied to each cluster. So the log data comes through here in a way that's duplicated. So I didn't really want to have to force the operator to pick a cluster here, like you could, and then it would just go down to one line when that deployment happened. But that didn't really feel like the right thing. I really just wanted to group by that cluster and just return one line entry. So just reduce the cardinality of that line by that one label. And so the query for that is relatively straightforward with a bit of line formatting. So what I really want is something like, dedupe by cluster. and that's the syntax that I've written. So that's part of that PR.
Nice. You know, originally you said group by, and I don't know, that resonated with me pretty well. I don't know if other people have opinions there, but as soon as you said group by, I knew exactly what it was going to do because I have the luxury of having spent a lot of years writing SQL.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it would be my vote, but I think we should have that conversation a little. But that's great though. Like we've had similar conversations for, you know, this kind of idea before. So awesome. Thank you for throwing together a PR for that. That's fantastic.
Sure thing. Yeah, so it's not exactly like group by in the sense that you can't do things like count by or count star, you know, to see how many lines were actually evaluated there. So that is something that Cyril suggested in the PR, and I think that would be grand. You know, in the Grafana UI, when you go to the Explore view and you maybe let me just get that going as well here. So let's just say here, like pod equals. So yeah, the Prometheus group is slightly different. So initially I thought of trying to implement the Prometheus group function in here, but the thing is group will then change all of the values to 1 from what I understand. And that's not exactly what I wanted. I didn't want to change any values of the data. I wanted to just return a bunch of lines. This isn't an aggregation. So yeah, I needed to.
Okay.
Yeah, for the annotations view, you can't return an aggregation. It has to be a list of labels, a list of log lines. Sorry.
Yeah.
So when you go into the Explore view and you do something like this, you get this dedupe feature over here in Grafana Explore. And when you do dedupe, let's say by numbers, you see you get this count here.
Yeah.
So what Cyril's suggesting is that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, please, Cyril, we should be able to return these counts as part of that dedupe by as well. So making available, I don't know, like a meta label or something. You know, you've got the double underscore error, double underscore in certain cases. You've got double underscore name. So perhaps like double underscore dedupe count, perhaps. Just as a meta label attached to each log line that gets returned, which is slightly tricky. I tried to implement that and couldn't get that working, so I would need some assistance there. But yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it's good. It's good. It's a good idea. My only concern is that it seems that there's like 2 use cases into a single syntax. Like one is reducing labels to use for, as annotation, and the other one is really deduping line. I wonder if the first one, the annotation, could not be solved by a metric query. If Grafana would support that.
Can you explain that a little bit more, Cyril?
Well, if you do a metric query, then you could get just a label. You could reduce label. You know, if you do a count by cluster, then you will get only the cluster label.
Okay.
But I guess it's not the same because you want only one label, isn't it? Like you want only one cluster, right?
Well, in fact, I want to remove that cluster from being evaluated when returning those log lines. So it will return one line. In fact, let me get my local Loki running, and then I can just demo it directly.
Yeah, because I think it's a great feature, but there seems to be like 2 use cases inside one, and we need to be careful with this.
Sure.
Or let's see if we can add 3 or 4 use cases.
Yeah.
Double down.
Also, it might be something difficult to like a burden at some point to scale or.
Yeah, consider right what the performance.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is my local. I'm just trying to remember which. I think it was this stream here. Let's go back a few days. There we go. So as you can see, there's a lot of duplication here. So let's just run this through the JSON filter first, and then let's say dedupe by. Let's find lines that have. Sorry, it's old. It's the commit hash. There we go. So if we didn't have that, it returns 435 lines. And as you can see, there's a lot of duplication here. Then there it reduces it down.
Oh, cool. Also, I wanted to tip my hat because you have another PR up for supporting hash-based comments, and I didn't know that you could support double/based comments in the syntax either. So both of those are actually quite handy.
Cool.
Yeah, we need to. We actually need to match that one.
Yeah, I think that one's ready. Yeah, it's just interesting because the syntax highlighting in Grafana, as you can see, handles and then doesn't handle the one that does work.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, I didn't know either. Well, I didn't know the slash ones worked. I guess I never tried it.
Yeah, the slash one works because we use the Go Alexa.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And that works too. Interesting. I remember wanting this, and originally I was thinking that this would need to be done like maybe in the UI, but
it's like a secret feature.
Secret feature.
So and you can also do without, as you'd expect. So like we do without hold, and then I'd have to do no, there would be another use case where I could do this. Let's say without caller, does that reduce down? Trying to find a good example that would work there. In any case, you get
the digit by if you do digit by components, then you will get only 2 different components. A single log line for.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you
how does it pick which ones it shows there, though? How do we?
The first one, I guess.
First.
Yeah, it won't always be the first one in my experience. It might be the first one that's available in cache, because I don't think the log lines get processed strictly in order every time. I've certainly seen cases where it's out of order.
Yeah, it depends if you are ingesting or not the data. Yeah, no, I think it's a great use case, especially for the info here. I think if you have like multiple error message and one is really spammy, that could be very useful. But yeah, I think it maybe requires to send back the number so that maybe Grafana can replace this dedupe using this feature, or they can use it they can show this number.
Yeah,
because it lack of this information.
The other question that I think I have is, would we want the syntax here to be, this is sort of promql-esque with by and parens, or should it be more of the logql filter type where we could actually do matchers, right? Dedupe by component equals daemon, or where we have a regex or equality matcher on the dedupe.
Yeah,
that'd be interesting too, because that's trying to think. I feel like I had a use case for that where I want to remove duplicates where the log level was info or something, or debug, or I don't want to dedupe everything by one label, but only if the label value was a certain thing. I just consider those all duplicates and strip them out because I don't care.
Can you combine multiple label? Is it possible right now if you do component?
Like component
column?
comma.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
I just put in the comments, but this actually looks very close to SQL's distinct on, rather than calling it dedupe or group by.
Group by, yeah.
Yeah, fair enough.
Distinct on doesn't really require a group by statement at all. You can just run distinct on, and you can provide multiple fields, and it will literally just return essentially the first that matches that criteria. I think naming it that would have more similarity to all the SQL naming and remove some of the collision of the naming with the other sort of concepts.
So
yeah,
like
I
that.
think it would help because I was initially confused between what's the difference between summing and doing distinct on in this case.
Yeah.
So reduce would that would definitely help me understand this better. Another question that I had was around can you also do distinct on the original log line, because we're evaluating labels. And you showed the deduplication that Grafana can do in UI, but is that
only if you pass it, like he did? That's why he has a JSON before.
okay?
Yeah.
So it's only if you pass it. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I don't know if it's, yeah, maybe we could support the distinct without anything, and then you could do it on the
Yeah.
line.
Interesting, right? Because I mean, the other solution to that is you just fall back to like you could always write a regex, but regex are kind of our enemy. So having a way to do that without regex would be nice.
Yeah.
I say regex is our enemy in that it's the slowest parser. So if you have the option to use JSON or log formatted lines, always prefer that, because having to run the regex parser is slow and hard to make fast.
So that's great. So that feels more close to a solution for me, like calling this distinct, because I think that's a lot more clear, and then it doesn't clash with this terminology here. Because I was thinking of expanding, so it's dedupe by right now, but I was thinking of also adding dedupe exact, dedupe number, and then mimicking this functionality, because these are very simple. I think this just looks at everything except the timestamp. This strips out all numbers, and that strips out all things that are not numbers, right?
Yeah.
And if you can throw out that metadata about what the result was of the dedupe, then this feature can be accelerated without the limit of doing only that on 1,000 lines. So for display in the UI, right? So you could dedupe for a set of 10,000 lines, let's say.
Yeah, that's a nice feature, right? Is you'll get 1,000 more useful lines in Grafana, because Grafana can't help. It doesn't control what it gets, right? So it can only dedupe on the 1,000. Doing that server side is better, for sure.
Yeah, you could even bring in a new UI element here where you can say group by or distinct by or whatever.
I guess they will actually use your feature. If you implement all of them, I think it's better that we use only server side, right? Because he has a big shortcoming, the client side, that it will do it only on the result. While server side, you can do it until it has 1,000 unique log line.
Yeah, exactly. And then you also have the same type of rule evaluation, right? So there might not be a difference then between how Grafana does it and how Loki does it natively.
So does it modify anything from the actual log line that is being shown, or not at all?
No. It's the syntax is very, very simple. It just it gets all the labels and then it hashes them, and then anytime it sees another line that has labels that match that hash, it disregards that line. So it will just return the first line for each unique label hash.
Yeah. So I personally I love this feature. I just maybe we need to start a design doc to put out everything that we just said and agree on everything. Because the demo really make it obvious that we need this. But I still think maybe we need to, or maybe just in the PR, instead of doing a design doc, just in the PR to write the plan, because I feel like it's going to be super useful. But maybe getting review from everyone on the design and get an agreement is a good idea.
I agree.
Yeah, I think it should the distinct is a good idea. I think if you do just distinct and you don't provide any label, I think you should do it on the full line.
Yeah.
So that it's pretty hard that you have multiple times the same line, but could still be useful for some people that are not using timestamp maybe as part of the log line.
Well, this would only be on labels, right? Or are you talking now about bringing these things server side?
Yeah, no, I'm saying that if you do distinct and you don't provide any label list, that maybe it could do it on the log line itself.
Yeah. Okay.
Log line plus label maybe, or just log line. I don't know. Well, I don't know if this is useful, but I currently don't see a big use case of that. But I do like
the biggest one is non-structured log lines that someone wants to dedupe by something, right? Like this. I guess the question is, under the hood, how would we just do a bytes contains to, you know what I mean? Can we do that quickly, right? Like to avoid having to regex parse something to dedupe it is the advantage of being able to dedupe the whole line. If it's structured, I guess to avoid having to parse it in general, I suppose, but maybe this is an optimization that only we care about, but I don't know.
Yeah, currently it just does hash, I think. So
yeah, I'll have to think about that a little bit. If there's, that's awesome, Danny. Thanks so much for
the
demo, especially. That was great.
Yeah,
also a pretty smooth demo, man. Like that. Let me just fire up my Loki real quick. No big deal. And
yeah, you couldn't see internally while I was going like shit.
Cool. Ward, I think I'll ask again. Anybody other feedback on that or anything before we move forward? Cool. Ward, you want to talk about the annotations?
Yeah, sure. It is something we have been discussing internally earlier this week. So for the annotations in Grafana, you can write an expression, local expression that does a stream selector, maybe a filter expression, but now with LocQL v2, where you have label extraction, there's a lot of folks, including me, that want to also do that on the extracted labels. For example, give me all, let's say you have high cardinality values that you don't want to promote to a standard label, but extracted at runtime. Then let's say cluster name or file path or customer ID, you still want to be able to do that, have those in a drop down as part of sorry, that's not annotations, template variable. Apology for the confusion. So that's one question I had. The other thing was annotations, and where you use the results as an annotation in a Grafana graph. The problem is if you have a lot of annotations for a certain time period, there's no limit in the amount of annotations that are shown. So the result is that the Grafana UI slows down quite a bit because of that. And yeah, it is not an easy problem to solve, I think, because you can, of course, do a hard limit on, let's say we have an operator that says, hey, limit 100 on a local expression. Then you don't get the full result. But the alternative is or showing everything, or maybe some other thing that we were thinking about is showing it dynamically based on the resolution of the graph that you're looking at. And yeah, two usability issues that are related to Grafana and Loki used in together. So yeah, just want to see if there are some other folks that running in the same problems, and what could be a nice solution for that that you are seeing.
Definitely. Oh, I'm trying to find it here. A issue that I opened a long time ago about something similar. Yes, I had a different use case for this, and one suggested solution here is this idea of only returning one out of every, or one per time interval log line. So a little bit along the lines of, last and, last by time or first by time, or max by time or whatever, but instead of being a metric, just have that operate on the log line. So I guess max doesn't make a lot of sense here, but if you had last at time or first at time, that way you could provide a range to these kinds of queries and use the variable substitution in Grafana. So as the graph zooms out, it only shows one entry for every second or 5 seconds or 30 seconds, etc. It's a little bit weird, right? Because you're just grabbing one line out of a list. So the annotations you're showing are sort of not determinate. And there's another problem here too, which is as you zoom in, do you know if you've gotten to a point where you're seeing all of them? We wouldn't have or don't have anything right now in the API that could communicate an answer here about whether or not the result set was, I guess, truncated. But it does provide the use case I had for this was I'm storing GPS coordinates in Loki. So I have kind of a metric. And when I display them on a map, as I zoom the map out, I don't need to see 1 second resolution. I just need to see one out of every 10 seconds or 30 seconds or a minute. In that use case, it doesn't matter if I just sort of, strip stuff out. Generally speaking, I suppose I could miss anomalies if I zoom out far enough, right? Like somebody drove way off course, but it fits that okay. I think that's what I would suggest as a solution for this. Don't, open to feedback on whether that's a good or bad solution, or if I'm just trying to push my own agendas here, because this was what I wanted for that use case. I opened an issue for this. I'm still trying to find it. Do I have any thoughts there? Good idea, Ed. Let's do it.
I'm wondering if the label value function from Grafana is working with local v2.
That sounds not related to this, though. More for the template variable part.
Yeah, sorry. These are actually two topics indeed that I grouped because they're all related to interaction with Grafana.
Yeah. The template variable stuff is, I actually haven't dug into that, but right, the Loki label API is very simple. You ask for a list of labels in a time range and it gives you them, and you get the names, and for a label name, you can ask for all the values. But I don't know if the label value function that exists for Prometheus was working for Loki. But that's a Grafana function. I think that would work against the existing API.
Yeah. So it does work for a normal stream-based selector and a filter expression. It doesn't work for a parser operator. So when we extract new labels, then these values and labels will not be recognized. That's the current behavior.
But Danny, you just showed us an example of that now. It wasn't using the label value, I think, but you were using a result of a Loki query into a dropdown?
It was the result of a Loki query into an annotation.
Oh, annotation. Okay. Okay, that's not the same thing.
Right, I found my issue.
All right, so you want a way to reduce the amount of line.
Yeah, so there's two things here. The annotations problem is that you write a query and there's 10,000 log lines that match it, and you graph them, and you just have a sea of red annotations across your graph, and you can't see anything.
Yeah, I have a hard time with this use case because like how will that be useful for the user if we filter out data randomly?
Well, so think of it this way, right? Say I tracked, what we do, right? Event Kubernetes deployments or something. And I want to look at, I zoom my graph out to like 30 days or something like that, or 7 days. Like if we restarted 100 times a day or 1,000 times a day, right? Like the graph would just be a sea of annotations. On a 30-day zoom, is that annotation terribly useful? Like, maybe, right? But basically downsampling it like we do with, the queries themselves is one way to make that more useful. So that if you saw some anomaly in your graph, as you start zooming in, more and more annotations would appear until you get to a resolution where all of them appear. The challenge there, right, is like, I think from a usability standpoint, it might not be that big a deal, right? Like you just keep zooming in until you see, but you could zoom into a level where you see some anomaly, you don't see the annotation, and then are like, well, I guess that wasn't caused by a restart, but had you zoomed in a little bit more, it would have popped up. So that's the problem.
Yeah. The way I look at it is like kind of a sum over time, where the annotation line becomes fatter, depending on the amount of annotations within that certain period. And then you can zoom into it, and then at some point, and the right resolution, it will split up to individual annotations. But again, I'm just thinking out loud, and the thing is, it requires quite some changes, I think, also in Grafana, so it's not on entirely a separate Loki issue. So maybe something also discussed with on the Grafana community call.
Yeah, but anyway, the maximum, I guess, amount of annotation you get is 1,000, no?
I would assume any query is going to be limited to whatever limit is defaulted, right? So yeah. But that, that doesn't really fix your problem. It just means you have a big wide red bar on the left side of your graph, right? And then nothing for the rest of it. Where you have 1,000 annotations crammed into the first 30 seconds or something. There's two use cases we just identified today that have requirements we don't support right now, which is more metadata being sent back to Grafana, right? Like sending back that, some of the like if we had a function called entry at time or first at time or last at time, communicating back how much wasn't sent sounds useful. Like that's information the users might want to see. Similar with dedupe, right? Sending back the amount of lines that were deduplicated or distinct removed. So some thought here, I suppose, to like extending the API is really in order. These all sound very similar, right? Like we're not sending some data back to the user on request of the user, but they probably could stand to know what wasn't sent back. It sounds like that's useful, like knowing the number of lines that are deduped. I think that's useful to see. Knowing that your annotation queries were sort of truncated at your request because there's too many to display. Excuse me. It's probably useful to see. At least then you could know whether or not you should keep zooming in to see more.
I must say, I had the histogram on top of the Explorer. It's a similar thing where you get you're not sure if you see the full histogram or not.
We're out of time to dig into the histogram.
No, but I think it's a great point. Thank you very much. But it isn't something that needs more conversation.
Yeah, no, I see the problem. I'm not sure about the solution.
Go ahead. I was about to talk over somebody.
No, sorry, I unmuted myself to cough, but I was already muted.
We are at time, so I gotta wrap things up. So thanks everyone for attending. I want to move this call. We keep talking about it, but it's going to have to probably go later in the day to be a little bit more accommodating to folks on the West Coast of the US, because it's 4 or 5 in the morning right now over there. It's only 8 a.m. here, and I'm not thrilled about that. So we'll probably push this out a little bit later. But Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Coming. Have a great day.
Bye.
Yes.
Oh, Owen, join.
Oh, this time.
Perfect timing.